All right, let's dive right into this explainer. I want you to just picture a cinematic sweep of the world's major tech centers late at night. Skyscrapers lit up against the dark sky, stock market screens flashing these relentless streams of data, factories humming on the third shift, and entrepreneurs locked into that late night hustle. This right here, this is the literal physical machinery of global enterprise. And today, well, we're going to break down exactly how the architects of this machinery actually built their massive, massive fortunes.
Because to really wrap our heads around that kind of scale, we have to start with a fundamental truth. As the source material for this explainer perfectly puts it, some of the world's greatest fortunes were not built from salaries. They were built from ownership. Owning companies, shares, intellectual property, and businesses that grew enormously over time. But you might be wondering, how did these people actually get their start? Well, that is exactly the question we're answering today.
Section 1. The myth of the salary. So most of us are basically conditioned from day one to think about wealth generation in terms of a predictable annual income, right? Salaries and regular paychecks. And sure, that's predictable and it's liquid, but ultimately it's capped. You literally cannot just salary your way to $100 billion. It just doesn't work that way. True financial empire building requires a completely different mechanical structure of wealth. If we look at billionaire net worth, it's really comprised of the value of assets, company shares, and intellectual property. The absolutely crucial takeaway for you here is that billionaire wealth isn't just some giant mountain of cash sitting in a savings account somewhere. It's totally fluid. It rises and falls with the actual valuation of the companies they own.
Section 2. Elon Musk, engineering a fortune.
Okay, so long before he was a household name launching heavy rockets into orbit, Musk actually had a really deep early interest in computers and entrepreneurship. He didn't just start out with heavy industry. Actually, his early years were totally focused on code and the early internet, and that culminated in the creation and eventual sale of a software company called Zip2. That initial success, that's what allowed him to get involved with X.com in his mid-career, which, as you probably know, ultimately became PayPal. So he took the capital from those early software and digital payment wins and made this massive pivot in his later years. He chose to finance incredibly ambitious physical engineering stakes, namely Tesla and SpaceX.
And we are talking about tangible, totally world-altering physical assets here. Think about it. Electric vehicles rolling off highly automated assembly lines. Groundbreaking battery technology that's pushing the very limits of physics. Rocket launches lighting up the night sky. Spacecraft docking in orbit. Sprawling factories filled with thousands of dedicated engineering teams. And of course, vast networks of satellites orbiting the Earth. This is heavy, realistic, metal-bending engineering we're talking about. So, the crucial point to remember is that his vast wealth is intrinsically tied to the market value of these specific companies. In fact, according to Forbes, his source of wealth is explicitly his Tesla and SpaceX shares. It is absolutely not a CEO salary. It's the immense, compounding market value of simply holding the equity in the engineering marvels he helped build and finance. Section 3. Larry Page, organizing the web.
Now, shifting gears entirely from rockets and automotive factories, we're going to move into the quiet halls of academia. Larry Page had this profound childhood fascination with technology that eventually led him to a pure, curiosity-driven research environment at Stanford University. Just picture those early, super bulky computer screens where Page and Sergey Brin were testing basic search engine concepts. They were literally just trying to find a mathematically better way to link and organize information. And that single, elegant idea? Well, it blossomed into the beginnings of Google, just a digital concept in a Stanford lab that ultimately began to organize the entire web.
But Google didn't just build a single product and call it a day. It rapidly scaled into a massive umbrella of diverse technology businesses under the name Alphabet. What started as just internet search evolved into a global advertising behemoth. And then came expansive cloud services, diverse software and hardware ecosystems, and now cutting-edge artificial intelligence. They basically built an inescapable global technological ecosystem. And just like our previous example with Elon Musk, we have to look at the true wealth source here. For Larry Page, it is Alphabet and Google share appreciation. The overarching lesson for us is really about consistency. Page became extraordinarily wealthy primarily through the long-term appreciation of these specific ownership shares, as his company continuously conquered new technological frontiers. Section 4. Jeff Bezos, delivering an empire.
So when we think of Amazon today, we mostly think of just unstoppable global dominance, right? But to truly understand this wealth, we really need to ground the narrative in some shockingly humble origins. We're talking about a small, cramped office in the early 90s, early computers, stacks of physical books, and cardboard boxes literally being packed by hand on the floor. That relentless drive to transition from a single online bookstore to a massive digital e-commerce platform, backed by this aggressive global logistics network and sprawling technology ecosystem, that is exactly what defined this unprecedented financial journey.
But hey, the physical books and cardboard boxes were really just the start. Let's talk about Amazon Web Services, or AWS. It's an incredibly important cloud computing business segment. Because while consumers were all focused on packages arriving at their front doors, AWS actually expanded Amazon into a massive technology ecosystem that literally powers a huge percentage of the internet today. It acted as this massive, compounding engine of expansion that fundamentally multiplied the underlying value of the entire company. So where does the net worth actually live in this case? Well, it lives in the ownership of Amazon shares. Connecting this right back to our understanding of equity. Bezos accumulated his massive fortune mainly through holding on to these specific shares, as that small, cluttered office transformed into a global logistics and cloud computing giant.
Section 5. The story is getting bigger. Okay, so we've looked at 3 highly distinct journeys today: electric vehicles and space travel, the organization of the world's information, and global logistics. From Zip2 and PayPal to a Stanford lab to selling books out of a cardboard box. I mean, these were completely different starting lines, right? But these paths all converge on a single, incredibly powerful financial reality: Tesla and SpaceX equity, Alphabet shares, and Amazon ecosystem shares. These wildly different beginnings all prove the exact same central thesis. Equity and asset ownership are the true, undeniable engines of global enterprise. The people who architect the future, well, they're the ones who own the shares of the future.
Man, we've unpacked a massive amount of wealth generation today, exploring how these 3 specific architects basically built their empires from absolute scratch. But you know, the landscape of technology is vast, and there are so many more stories to uncover. As our source material beautifully puts it, 3 fortunes, 3 very different beginnings, but the story is only getting bigger. Next, we meet the other founders whose ideas transformed the internet, personal computers, social media, and global technology. So I'm going to leave you with this one thought to ponder until next time. Who transformed the world next?
Peak of global wealth. If you caught part 1, you know we looked at the foundational titans of industry. But today, we're shifting gears completely. We're zeroing in on a very specific breed of billionaire, folks whose fortunes weren't built on physical real estate or traditional retail, but on code, connectivity, and silicon. Let's get right into how the world's richest people built their fortunes, part 2.
The internet did not create just one fortune. It created an entire generation of entrepreneurs whose companies change how the world searches, communicates, works, and does business. I absolutely love this quote because it's the perfect framing for what we're looking at today. We aren't just talking about a couple of lucky, isolated success stories here. We are witnessing a sweeping generational shift. The digital age didn't just give us cool new gadgets, it completely rewired every single aspect of modern life. And in doing so, it generated historic, unprecedented levels of wealth.
So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the digital economy generation as a whole. Then, we'll look at 4 distinct tech pioneers: Sergey Brin, Michael Dell, Mark Zuckerberg, and Larry Ellison. Finally, we'll break down the true mechanics of wealth.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the digital economy generation. This is the Silicon Valley boom that birthed a completely new class of entrepreneur. Moving right along to Section 2. Here we're looking at Sergey Brin, the world of search and ads, and that incredible journey from a simple research project to an absolute global giant.
To really wrap our heads around this fortune, we've got to look at the environment that actually birthed it. Sergey Brin's story kicks off with his move to the United States as a child, but the real catalyst, that was his academic work over at Stanford University. Picture this. It was right there in those university computer labs, surrounded by blinking servers and maxed out credit cards they used just to buy hardware, that he met Larry Page. What started out as just a neat academic inquiry was about to fundamentally change how humanity accesses information.
Now, notice the incredible contrast here. Google started as this small, brilliant research project dedicated just to indexing the internet. But here's the thing, a search engine alone doesn't actually make you a billionaire. The real transformation, the absolute game changer, happened when they integrated targeted advertising into that search capability. They essentially built a massive, self-sustaining economic engine where finding information naturally overlapped with matching consumers to businesses. It was brilliant.
And this brings us to a really crucial point. Sergey Brin didn't become astonishingly wealthy by collecting some massive paycheck or just hoarding cash profits. His immense wealth grew strictly through the rising value of his ownership stake in Google, and later its parent company Alphabet. As their advertising business scaled up globally, the company itself became enormously valuable. Because he owned a huge piece of that pie, his personal wealth skyrocketed right alongside it. All right, on to Section 3, Michael Dell. This is all about going direct to consumer and completely challenging the retail status quo.
You know, just like Brin, Dell's origins are deeply rooted in this early, almost obsessive fascination with machines. While he was studying hardware at the University of Texas, it just kind of clicked for him. He realized he could completely bypass traditional middlemen. So, armed with about $1,000, he literally started customizing computers right there in his dorm room and selling them straight to customers. The real breakthrough here wasn't even the tech itself. It was a total reimagining of how the business actually worked.
Think about traditional retail for a second. You build a computer, ship it to a middleman, stick it on a store shelf, and then just wait around for a customer to walk in and buy it. Dell completely shattered that model. His direct-to-consumer approach bypassed the store shelf entirely. By controlling the assembly lines and supply chains directly, Dell could build exactly what you wanted and ship it right to your front door. So, what was the financial result? Well, it's exactly what we saw with Sergey Brin. Michael Dell's fortune is inextricably connected to Dell Technologies. As his direct-to-consumer model absolutely conquered the market, the company's value exploded. His immense wealth is a direct result of his ownership and his subsequent investments in that business, rather than simply taking home a big executive salary. It's all about the equity.
Let's turn to Section 4, Mark Zuckerberg. We're talking social media scale and literally billions of digital interactions. Are you starting to notice a pattern with these origin stories? Because once again, we're starting with a young programmer in a university environment. What began as a closed college network rapidly broke through those boundaries. It expanded out to the general public, perfectly riding that incredible surging wave of mobile phone adoption. To support this kind of unprecedented global reach, they had to build massive data centers filled with engineers. They evolved a simple dorm room project into the sprawling global platform we now know as Meta.
Think of Meta as this massive digital universe where advertisers, creators, and users all collide. We're talking about a platform that supports literally billions of digital interactions every single day. Now, to keep something like that running, you need an awe-inspiring infrastructure of data centers. But what's the core economic engine paying for all of that? Advertising. Meta generates its revenue primarily through ads across its platforms, and as that revenue scaled to astronomical heights, so did the value of Zuckerberg's personal ownership stake. Up next is Section 5, Larry Ellison. This is where we dive into enterprise cloud tech and the hidden architecture of the corporate world. Ellison's journey starts way back in the early days of computing. But rather than focusing on everyday consumers searching the web or checking their social feeds, his sights were set on massive enterprises. He played the pivotal role in founding Oracle, developing early database software that big corporate offices desperately needed just to organize their information. And over the decades, Oracle didn't just survive, it expanded massively, ultimately dominating enterprise technology and transitioning into the modern cloud infrastructure that practically runs the world today. Let's clarify what this actually means in practice. Enterprise database software is a seriously powerful business-to-business model. It provides the essential data infrastructure and cloud services to massive corporations. Think of it like the digital plumbing for global business. When you provide the essential infrastructure that other giant companies absolutely need just to survive, you've essentially created one of the most powerful, scalable business models on the planet.
And honestly, the financial takeaway here shouldn't surprise you at this point. Larry Ellison's astronomical fortune is strongly connected to his massive ownership of Oracle along with his various other investments. He built an enormous, vital business, kept a significant piece of it for himself, and let the sheer scale of the global economy drive its value infinitely upward.
That brings us to Section 6, the true mechanics of wealth. Let's break down the universal formula.
So we have looked at 4 completely different digital empires: search engines, consumer hardware, social networks, and enterprise software. But dig beneath the surface and you'll see they all used this exact universal formula. Step 1, you build or join a business. Step 2, you secure ownership in that business, usually as equity or stock. Step 3, you drive explosive company growth, scaling it from a dorm room to global data centers. Step 4, because the company is growing and making serious money, the share value of your ownership skyrockets. And finally, Step 5, that share value translates directly into immense personal wealth. But there's a really crucial caveat here, and this actually explains why billionaire net worth is so often totally misunderstood. Billionaire wealth can change dramatically when stock prices move. This kind of wealth isn't just a mountain of gold coins sitting in a giant vault somewhere. It is entirely tied to the stock market. If a company has a bad quarter, literally billions of dollars can vanish from a founder's net worth on paper in a single afternoon. But if the market surges, their wealth skyrockets just as fast. It is a highly dynamic, fluctuating, market-driven kind of wealth. So we've explored the digital pioneers, and we've mapped out that universal wealth formula. But out of the top 10 richest people in the world, we still have 4 names left on our list. We've seen exactly how the internet generation generated billions simply by scaling code and connectivity. But what about the rest? What do those remaining 4 stories reveal about another, entirely different side of modern extreme wealth? Well, I'm going to leave you to think about that one. I hope this explainer helped clarify the true mechanics of how these digital fortunes are really built.
Over our last few sessions, we've been exploring a truly fascinating landscape, the origins and really the architecture of the world's most staggering fortunes. Today we are arriving at the climax of our journey. We're going to examine the final 3 billionaires in our series, and in doing so, we're uncovering the ultimate foundational secret to their wealth. So, if you've ever wondered what actually separates everyday financial success from, world-shifting economic power, you are absolutely in the right place. Okay, let's dive into this, because this is where the story gets really, really fascinating. On one hand, we've got the microscopic, highly technical world of computer chips and artificial intelligence servers. But then, on the other hand, we have the very physical, sprawling world of European retail stores, fabric, and fashion warehouses. How do vastly different paths in completely unrelated industries lead to the exact same destination of extraordinary wealth? Well, to figure that out, we need to look at our first titan today. Section 1. The Paths to Wealth. Jensen Huang. Let's see how this builds over time. Jensen Huang's story begins with a deep education in electrical engineering, literally learning the silicon nuts and bolts of our digital era. Now, back in 1993, he co-founded NVIDIA. Early on, their focus was primarily on computer graphics. They were basically pioneering the technology that made those 1999-era video games look so incredibly cool. But as we know, they didn't just stay in gaming. Fast forward to 2024, and those exact same engineers who were designing chips and semiconductor fabrication methods, they evolved into creating the foundational hardware for the massive modern AI data centers that we absolutely rely on today. And it all centers around the GPU, or Graphics Processing Unit. Originally, this specialized electronic circuit was just meant to render pixels on a screen so your video games wouldn't lag. Pretty simple, right? But the tech world soon realized something huge. The way GPUs process complex tasks simultaneously makes them absolutely vital for artificial intelligence. Today, these specific chips act as the beating heart, the vital engine, inside massive AI data centers. They are literally the hardware driving the entire tech and AI boom we're seeing right now. But here's why this really matters for our story on wealth today. Jensen Huang didn't become one of the wealthiest people on Earth just by taking home a massive CEO paycheck. No, his fortune is intrinsically connected to his ownership of NVIDIA's shares. As the company experiences just explosive growth in the semiconductor and AI computing market, his equity compounded. Retaining that ownership in a booming market, that is the actual tangible source of his fortune. Section 2. Steve Ballmer's Software Empire. Now, Steve Ballmer's story is deeply connected to the early days of personal computing. He joined Microsoft during its absolute earliest period of explosive growth, largely thanks to a very consequential relationship with Bill Gates. Ballmer had a massive career, obviously, eventually becoming CEO and overseeing the incredible rise of Windows and corporate software. But what's really interesting about this contrast is where his enormous wealth actually originates. I mean, it doesn't come from a traditional CEO salary. Sure, executive paychecks are huge, but they don't land you on the top 10 global wealth list. Ballmer's staggering net worth comes entirely from his massive corporate ownership and his strategic investments in Microsoft over his long career. Section 3. Amancio Ortega's Fast Fashion. And this brilliantly illustrates a total shift in gears. We're leaving the digital landscapes of Silicon Valley behind for the cinematic streets and small clothing workshops of Spain, where Amancio Ortega methodically built his empire. First, he pioneered the very concept of fast fashion. Second, he established incredibly rapid product cycles, literally moving designs from paper to store racks in record time. Third, he maximized supply chain efficiency through these cutting-edge logistics centers. And finally, he executed a massive global expansion, evolving those early workshops into the absolute giant that is the Inditex Fashion Group, which you probably know best for Zara. It's a highly structured operational masterpiece. But just like our tech founders, we have to ask the big question: where does all that extreme wealth actually sit? Well, Ortega built his fortune heavily through the ownership of Inditex, but it doesn't stop there. He also poured massive value into strategic real estate investments across the globe. So he isn't just generating retail revenue, he actually owns the underlying business structures and the physical real estate they operate within. Honestly, it's a complete masterclass in asset ownership.
Section 4. The Global Wealth Map, the Top 10 Recap.
Let's pull the lens all the way back now and look at the sheer scale here. We've got Elon Musk pushing boundaries in automotive and space, Larry Page and Sergey Brin organizing the world's information, Jeff Bezos dominating e-commerce, Michael Dell revolutionizing hardware, Mark Zuckerberg connecting the globe, Larry Ellison powering enterprise data. And today, we added Jensen Huang's AI chips, Steve Ballmer's software dominance, and Amancio Ortega's retail empire. I mean, from space to retail, from search engines to artificial intelligence, the industries across this map are just incredibly diverse.
Section 5. The Power of Ownership, the Ultimate Secret.
Because beneath all that industry diversity, there is one overarching economic principle that unites all 10 of these distinct case studies. Let's completely shatter a very common misconception right now. When a lot of us hear the word billionaire, we tend to picture a giant vault filled with static money, kind of like a cartoon character swimming in gold coins, right? Well, that is not reality. These fortunes are not simply piles of cash sitting idle in bank accounts.
Instead, much of their wealth represents active ownership in businesses and assets. And the value of those assets? It is constantly rising and falling. Stock market movements can change these billionaire rankings incredibly quickly. The lists you see published all the time, they're merely dynamic snapshots tied to the market at that specific moment in time. This wealth is alive, and it's tied directly to the performance of the companies they own.
So the crucial point is this. Whether you start a small online bookstore, a search engine, a graphics chip company, or even a Spanish clothing business, the fundamental rules of extreme wealth are identical. First, build something undeniably valuable. Second, keep your ownership in that creation. And third, have the patience to allow that value to compound over decades.
As our source material so beautifully summarizes, the world's richest people did not all start with the same opportunities, the same ideas, or the same industries, but their stories reveal one extraordinary truth about modern wealth. Fortunes can grow when ownership grows with the business. This brings us to a really compelling question for you today. How can you shift your own mindset from simply earning a paycheck to building and retaining ownership in your own life and career? It's a powerful thought to leave you with. Keep exploring, keep understanding, and I'll see you in the next explainer.